All right. All right. Hello, everyone. I know we still have a bunch of people joining, but in the interest of time, we want to go ahead and get started today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Lauren McGee. I am the Content and Education Manager here at Clock. And we are thrilled today to bring you this webinar, Clock Asks the Experts, GPT for Legal Essentials for Effective Prompt Engineering, presented by Pramada. Before we get started, I just want to give a little quick overview of the platform and the tools that you're going to use for today's webinar. So we have the chat box. Feel free to chat with each other, share your thoughts. This is a great place to do that. We also have the Q&A box, and if any questions do come up that you would like answered, please put them in the Q&A box. We did ask for questions during registration. We're going to get to a lot of those today, but please feel free to put your questions, any new ones that come up, in that box, and we'll try to get to them. Handouts. Our presenting sponsor today did provide some handouts. I will be dropping them in the chat. I will also give you a link to those in the follow-up email so that you'll be able to access them. And then session evaluation. After the session ends, we'd love for you to just take a quick moment to complete a brief survey to provide feedback on your experience with today's session. So that'll come up on your screen when you close out today. And we are recording today's session, so you will be able to watch it at any time. We're going to send out a link following the session so that you can go back and revisit it. All right, so with that, I don't want to take up any more time. I once again welcome you all and thank Pramada so much for sponsoring this great webinar. And I'm going to pass it over to Padrama Brari, the Chief Technology Officer at Pramada, to get us started.
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate it. I'm here. I'm Padrama Brari, CTO of Pramada. I'm joined with my partner, Tom Rice, who's the legal director at TravelPerk. We thought, what's the best way to introduce the companies that we work for? Then is probably to use GPT to introduce us. So we went to ChatGPT and said, "Hey, what does Pramada do? And who are they?" And got this answer that was a little bit dated. It was from 2021. We don't call ourselves the commercial relationship data platform anymore. And so the reason for this is, as many of you may know, GPT was trained with data from back in 2021. So it only knows what it knew back then. And then we said, all right, let's turn on the web access of GPT, which you get it if you have kind of access to GPT plus. And with that, let's say, hey, go read this page and summarize it. And this time it was more up to date. Now, this is the information that is on our website that we help organize contracts and empower and so on. But it's a little bit too wordy for this presentation. So we said, all right, well, how about we prompt engineer one more thing here and say, hey, can you shorten the answer on the last answer you gave us? And the short answer it gave is Pramada is the contract management platform that simplifies and accelerates contract processes for businesses. It's an end-to-end solution with technology and contract experts and so on and so forth, where we basically do everything for our customers. They give us their contracts, we do everything. Did the same thing for TravelPerk, and I'll ask Tom to kind of introduce TravelPerk.
Cool, thanks, Padram. I'm pretty happy with the summarization here, and yeah, thank you for the relieving me of my responsibility to introduce us too deeply. I think what's relevant for context and what might interest people on this call is that we're also a business with 1,500 employees. There's been a 300% growth in headcount in the last 18 months, and we're a legal team of 8. So we're dealing with a lot of common challenges to legal professionals. We're in a hyper growth. We're having to design and deliver intelligent solutions that can scale, and we're having to try and fathom ways to coach sort of risk informed and resilient behaviors right at the point of need.
Thank you, Tom. So what's the agenda for today? Based on a lot of the questions we've received, I think there is this general question about what on earth is generative AI? What is GPT? What are large language models? What is this new beast that's taken over over the world all of a sudden in 6 months? And and then, what can it do for legal ops? Can it be of value today or in the future? And to be able to answer that, we're going to kind of take an approach of showing you a commercial product in Permata of how we use GPT to help legal ops or legal in general. And then have Tom kind of show you how in their business, they're actually using ChatGPT as is to be able to impact their business without a commercial product like Permata. And then we'll kind of dig into some of the pitfalls of GPT. This issue with hallucinations, and how to address them and how to overcome them. And then obviously the topic of this webinar, prompt engineering. What is this? What is this concept? Why does it matter? What do we do? How do we do it? Do we need an engineering degree to do it? And I'll kind of go from there. So let's dig into it. Let's start with a little bit of a higher level definition. What is artificial intelligence? We've been hearing about AI for a better part of 2-3 decades now. And it's been, we've been told that it's going to take over the world and it's going to automate everything and, it's going to replace humans and all of that. But it really hasn't materialized to that extent. In specific cases of being able to do very specialized tasks, it's been very good. But generally speaking, what AI means is it's a machine that's trained to emulate human thought and perform tasks in the real world. What is machine learning? Machine learning is a machine that's trained to make predictions or decisions on new data based on data that's been trained on previously. So how is generative AI different? Well, generative AI is different in that it's an AI that generates new novel output concepts like new text, novel text, images, and so on, using pre-existing data. So it actually is not just regurgitating what it's been trained on, it's actually generating new concepts by stitching together things that it knows about. And to kind of dig into this a little bit deeper, AI in general, there is different domains in AI, like machine learning and robotics and computer vision and so on. Specifically under machine learning, there's been this notion of supervised machine learning versus unsupervised machine learning. And most of, a lot of the effort up to this point has gone into supervised machine learning with the data scientist in the middle, kind of curating the data that you train the machine on, and then telling the machine what the expected behavior is, and then, kind of getting the machine to kind of start learning and finding patterns. And then once the machine sees new data, it repeats those results and hopefully does it at scale and more accuracy than people can. Unsupervised machine learning is this notion of just instead of trying to control the machine's behavior in terms of how it learns, let's just throw data at it and see what happens. Let's see what the neural network does. And somewhere along the way, people came along and said, why don't we, now that we have all this massive computing power, why don't we throw a quarter of the internet data into a machine and see what happens? And that's where large language models were born. It takes sometimes, I think the first version of it took about 6 months to train. And what ended up happening was beyond just language understanding, lo and behold, we started to see signs of intelligence where it actually feels like it's understanding what it's reading and it's answering questions. And so GPT-3 was trained on 17 gigabytes of data. It has about 175 billion parameters. Never mind what that means. The more parameters, kind of the smarter the thing becomes, if you will. And then they gave it the bar exam, and it scored at a 10th percentile level. GPT-4 was trained on 45 gigabytes of data. It has 1 trillion parameters, and it passed the bar exam at a 90th percentile level. Which is clearly, that would make a GPT-4 a lawyer. And now what is GPT-5 is being worked on? How much data are going to train it on? How many trillions of parameters will it have? How will it do on the bar exam? And then there's this general panacea around artificial general intelligence. Can a machine truly achieve intelligence equivalent to human beings? And to be determined, but boy, are we making progress in that direction. How do large language models get trained? So there's different phases of training of data that are possible. And it's important to know this when you're dealing with GPT because it can get very confusing. The the large language model itself is the pre-training phase, where a large corpus of text data from the internet is fed into it, and it's in an unsupervised fashion. It kind of trains itself. And this is the portion that passed the bar exam without any supervision, right? Somehow it gained a level of intelligence to be able to take those questions and answer them effectively enough to pass the bar exam. Then there is the possibility of, for example, having domain-specific fine-tuning of the large language model, a bit of a supervised machine learning. So, for example, if you want to really, like, even though it passed the law bar, you could give it more specific training, maybe on the type of law that you practice, to make it more of an expert in your domain. And this is where this would come in. This pre-training phase can be very expensive. Millions of dollars cost 6 months to train it. They've made the fine-tuning a lot more effective. It doesn't cost nearly as much, but it does cost some money and a little bit of effort and a little bit of expertise required to get it there. But you don't really need this to be able to use GPT. And then there is hey, what about my data? Can I feed my data into it and have it answer questions about my data? Which is what I call contextual learning training. Here's my data, answer questions about me. And then there is kind of this interactive session where the end user is talking to GPT, and through prompt engineering and prompt tuning, you can also train GPT to behave in certain ways that give you better answers, if you will. So how can GPT help legal ops? First, we're going to show you the Pramada GPT Assist commercial product that will be released for general availability later this year. Just to give you a flavor of what's possible, the art of the possible, if you will. Then my partner, Tom, will pick up and show you how, even without a Pramada, you can use GPT to impact your business today. So the use case I'm going to walk you through with Pramada is, let's say it's the end of the quarter. There's this rush of contract requests, email, Slack, etc., and you're being bombarded. You got to keep track of all of them. And then you pick a new request that you're trying to process. Let's say it's a new order. And then you have to go find the account that it's for. You got to go find all the existing contracts, MSAs, amendments, orders, etc. Then you got to kind of review those and read them just to make sure you have full context of what's happened up to this point. Invariably, you have a corporate negotiation playbook that you want to become compliant with and push toward, with every engagement with the customer. So you got to make sure that whatever you produce is compliant and the historical stuff is compliant, if possible. Maybe you want to generate a new amendment to achieve that compliance for an existing legacy customer. And then maybe at that point, you want to generate a new order. Again, hopefully something that uses existing orders as a template, but also achieve some degree of compliance. So with that said, before I move on, this obviously takes a lot of time, under time pressure, and invariably a lot of this, the accuracy takes a hit when you are, when you are under extreme time pressure, which is usually what happens at the end of the quarter. And then this playbook we talked about, every legal organization has a playbook that they would like to use in terms of guiding the way they negotiate. So here's an example of it. Payment terms, you want them to be 30 days, from the receipt of invoice paid in US dollars, for example. For assignment, a consent needs to be obtained 180 days before the assignment, and so on. So with that said, let me back up here. Let's switch over to the demo. So I'm the lawyer. Here's a list of my contract requests. Is the latest one I'm picking up. Let's refresh this. Sorry, timed out. And it's a order for this product called Cloud Pro Magic, or this account called Greystone Corporation. And so without GPT, what do? I go look up Greystone Corporation. I find all the existing signed contracts. Here's the MSA. Here's First Amendment, Second Amendment, 3 orders placed against it. But invariably, even though there's a lot of key information in Pramada where I can kind of see the term information and so on, invariably to get a complete picture of the whole document family, I have to go and open these up and probably read and review them. And And then, here's kind of the second amendment, and okay, what does that do? And that was the master. And here's the last order that was placed. And here's kind of the template of the order and the structure of the order and certain clauses that are in there and so on. And so that's time consuming. And when I'm under time pressure, it's kind of difficult to do all of that. But let's say that I can use GPT for this purpose. It's the same contract family. We've told GPT, hey, answer questions about this family and only about this family. So, for example, I say summarize master, and it starts basically going through and giving me key information about this. Now, what is behind summarize master? That's where prompt engineering in our product comes in, where we've iterated many, many times as to how do we ask this question to get the results in an effective way. And put that prompt behind the summarize master button. Obviously, there is a interactive ability to ask questions yourself as well, which I'll show in a second. But when you productize these things, you tend to kind of productize the common things that people want to do and put effective prompts behind them, so it makes it easy for them to kind of achieve those things. And in this case, for example, you can see that it tells us the effective date of the master, the term of the master, its renewal information, what the First Amendment did to it, where the termination clause was introduced, and then Second Amendment changed the assignment clause and explains what it is, and then some more key information, terms and conditions about the master. So in a very quick scan, without having read anything, I get a high-level view of what this thing is, what it does. What about the orders? So here's a list of my orders. First order was this for Cloud Tracer product. Second one was for Cloud BI. This is the monthly subscription fees, annual fees, and so on. So I can see the effective dates. I can see 3 orders placed. And very quickly, without having read anything, I can see everything that's happened. Now, that playbook I showed you, we fed that to GPT and had it summarize it into a set of playbook rules. So here we can see the rules that it's operating with. Rule 1, payment term clauses must be made at most 30 days from receipt of invoice in US dollars. Assignment clauses must be 180 days of consent, and so on and so forth. Now, this is really cool, but now, and everything up to this point, it's kind of cool and slick, but again, is it a huge leap forward necessarily? Maybe not. But then what about if I could ask GPT to review all the clauses in these agreements and tell me whether or not they're compliant with my playbook without me having to go and check everything? And so this is where really the power of GPT kicks in, because of the fact that it understands legalese, because it understands that all the contracts it's reviewing them understands what they're about. It goes through and, for example, says for payment terms, orders, first order, third order are compliant, but second order is not, because it's allowing 60 days after receipt of invoice. Assignment clauses, I'll skip to Second Amendment. Second Amendment, it highlights that it's not compliant with rules 2 and 3. And look at the answer it gave as to why it's not compliant. The amendment allows the customer to assign the agreement with 90 days notice, but it does not require prior written consent or mention the 1-year liability period. This is the type of answer you would get from a lawyer, right? Not necessarily from automation. So this is, you can see where the power of this thing is. Now, if it understands this, could it auto-generate an amendment for me that addresses all the non-compliance with the historical understanding of that there's been 2 amendments already placed? It surely can. So, we're going to ask GPT to draft a new amendment. Give it a second. And it generates it, in the case of our product, as a Word document where it already knows it's the 3rd Amendment. It knows the parties involved and the MSA and the effective dates. All of that is placed in here. For payment terms, says the existing payment term shall be amended as such. Assignment clause, the existing Section 15, which obviously it understood Section 15 was an assignment clause, shall be further amended as such. And then, there was no price changes before, so a new section shall be added to address price changes. And of course, there's a signature block and so on. And then the lawyer can edit this and tweak and adjust it and use it if they choose to. Last but not least, could it use the previous orders as a template to generate a new order, both structurally and also carrying forward the clauses that were there? For example, if we'd agreed to a discount for this customer in a previous order, we don't carry that forward, obviously the customer will be upset. So for GPT to be able to not only kind of generate the new order, but also to kind of apply, carry forward the previous terms, and also address any non-compliance all in one shot, is where kind of the power of this thing comes in. So here's the new order that I generated. You can see it's the Cloud Magic Pro, 3 licenses. It's the price I put in per user. It calculated the monthly fee, calculated the annual fee, carried forward all the clauses, but it replaced the payment clause with a compliant clause, which allows 30 days. It was previously 60 days. And also replaces the price increase clause with something that's compliant with our price increase playbook. So can we ask it just interactive questions? Does Cloud Pro have rights to the identified data? If I can type. Not only does it say you have the right, but it also tells you where. To show you further power of GPT. So because the way GPT is trained, it is actually language neutral. It can understand almost any human language, and it can speak in any human language. So here I'm going to say, summarize the assignment clause, provide the answer in Japanese. And if you speak Japanese, you can probably hopefully confirm that this is the assignment clause. And so that's kind of where some of the power of this comes in. I can see a 90 in there, so I'm going to assume that that is referring to the 90 that's in the assignment clause. And obviously, there's a lot more that can be done here. One last thing I want to say is, I'm going to ask it, who is the president of the USA? And it says, I don't know. And why does it say I don't know? It's because we have told it to only answer questions about this contract family and nothing beyond that, which is one of the key things that we're going to come back to. All right, so generative AI clearly has superpowers, but still suffers from a garbage in, garbage out problem. It can make logical errors. It can suffer from hallucinations. That basically means it sometimes makes very confident statements that are about things that are factually not true. It happens. How do you minimize the chances of these things so you can actually trust your answers? What we do is we use a GPT sandbox, if you will. I just showed you previously that we set up the GPT to only answer questions about these contracts. And how do we do that? We give it our data, we give it some metadata, we give it some context and chat history, we tell it its role, and then the prompts come in. Right, the prompt engineer prompts come in, and this results in pretty accurate and high-level business value, where we don't have to worry about hallucinations and errors as much. Could they still happen? Of course, but they really get minimized in that context when you kind of put it in that sandbox. Having said that, I'm going to hand off to Tom and let him pick up from here.
Thanks, Badram. And yeah, just to go back to that last slide, that effectively is what we're doing at TravelPerk. So we have a closed data set, what Padram is referring to as like a sandbox environment, where we have trained it against our own data. And so it would fail to answer questions that are not within the data set. Do we see hallucinations? Well, actually, one thing that we found, and Padram and I have discussed at length, is it's not that we see hallucinations. What we sometimes see, and let's say this 1 times out of 20, is it draws on content that's not quite optimal for the context of the prompt. And so that's where fine-tuning can help us out as well. I'll get under the hood of that now. So if we go to what is prompt engineering. So I have material in the slides, but I'm not going to talk completely off them. So one thing that I really want to communicate, particularly to this community of legal professionals, is this is essentially programming, but in a natural language. And so our bridge into this technology is, go in, play with ChatGPT. And what essentially you're doing there is framing parameters to test not only the performance of the model and your understanding of its limitations, but to elicit specific outcomes. And one thing I really hope that you can all leave with after this, and is a massive part of the results we're seeing with this, is that we as legal professionals are really good at this. So you can read through the bullets here, but essentially what this boils down to in terms of effective prompts and the parameters for them, the key skills required, and Pedram, jump in if I speak off pet here, but do you speak with clarity of intent? Can you frame the boundaries of a problem? And can you concisely distill important context? And that you can. That's what we've been trained to do as lawyers. So this is perhaps the most accessible technology that's dropped in our lifetimes that suits our skill set.
And if I can put some color there, Tom, I would treat, if I were a lawyer, I would treat GPT as if it was a coworker, another lawyer, maybe a paralegal that I'm having a conversation with. Same way you would, ask questions or offer context when you're trying to ask a question of a paralegal. And if they don't get it, then you clarify and you provide more context and you have this interactive session with them. And then eventually they get it, hopefully, and they give you proper answer. Treat GPT the same. Prompt engineering is basically that. Ask something. If it doesn't get it, provide more context. If it still doesn't get it, provide even more context. And then at some point it gets it. But it's all natural language. Like Tom said, this is what you're really good at.
And essentially, just to build on that point you've just made, like how you interact with one junior lawyer might be different with how you interact with another junior lawyer. So the last point on this slide is the efficacy of your prompting style in one large language model, let's say that's ChatGPT-4, might be less effective in BARD. So you will curate and iterate your style according to the type of model you're in. So if we move to the next slide, John. So I'm not going to run through these because these are essentially the basics, and I'm sure you've all been in, you've all iterated, and you have quite a rich understanding of how to frame prompts, what's your problem to be solved. And I think what essentially it comes down to for us and what we've seen in trying to sort of prompt engineer the data sets we've built is, there always needs to be a reasonable level of clarity and specificity, because humans will respond to a general multifaceted question and problem with a very general and multifaceted answer. Now, that's not to say you lose that as context, but that's essentially what it is. It's context. So you could actually frame your way in, and that could be an opening prompt, but then you really need to have a strategy for getting into the specific outcomes. So subtasking, again, a skill we do really well as lawyers. One thing I think Pedram has just mentioned, and what we've had quite a lot of fun with and a lot of trial and error, is framing the personas of these bots. So who are they? Like, what's their tone, look, feel, style? How should they impress themselves on their audience according to what problem they're designed to solve? To give you an example, we have a regulatory bot for a very specific team within TravelPerk that knows nothing about TravelPerk policy. It knows nothing about TravelPerk templates. And actually, most of our work persona-wise has gone into that bot to really be clear that I only have a headline summary of the law and your responsibilities as, say, an employer in this jurisdiction. I actually know nothing about your policy at TravelPerk. And that's been quite a rich and deep learning experience, because we set a persona framework, but we've also had to fine tune against that. And I'm sure Pedram has encountered similar types of activity in that respect. The other thing, and I think this could drive real big incremental improvements. I know there's a lot of legal operations experts and design specialists out there that are on a personal mission to simplify our use of language in the law. I see fantastic work, a huge fan of BuzzSomo's terms, and maybe I can drop a link into the chat in terms of how they've tried to demystify what they do. So when you're framing a prompt parameter, if you haven't iterated in these spaces already, avoid too much legal jargon. So make this clause mutual will not be as effective as prompt as you are a junior lawyer. You've been asked to look at this clause. That each party under this contract should have equal responsibilities and undertakings. Please review that clause with that context in mind and edit it using the most reduced edits you can. Now, ChatGPT loves that and can perform against that. Make this clause mutual. There's no persona, there's no background context. It will struggle, you know, in that sense. So if I can impress on you one thing, it's like that mission to distill how we use language is only going to get strengthened by our use of ChatGPT. So if we move to the next slide. So here I've included, I won't talk at length about these, but like I was very conscious in designing this just to include a couple of examples that would be relevant to your everyday. So to the context of demystifying language, I've included a link to the OpenAI chat here in the presentation, but I essentially go in and I ask ChatGPT to summarize our IP clause. Now that is a SaaS agreement that we host online. It's publicly available information. And with that information, I get back those simplified, drafted in layman's terms, framing. I'm then interested to know how can, when a user hovers over that clause on the web, how can we produce hover text that demystifies what it's saying? So I then frame a prompt into ChatGPT to ask me how to do that. Now at TravelPerk, I don't have publishing rights for our website, but one thing I do know is when I go into our publishing agency, I go in not only with a task, I come in with a, here's how I think it could be done. And that's really quite powerful. And you can imagine the efficiency gains, the time to complete these sorts of activities exponentially improves. So if we go to the next, which is the visualization of a legal operations use case. And I won't really labor this too hard because I think you've seen something far more advanced in the Pramata project. But this was a real unlock moment in January when I was playing around in ChatGPT 3, when I tried to frame context and parameters and how do I make my playbook really accessible at the point of need and demand. And so I framed a little situation where I tell it, Ben is a sales executive, he has certain access to pre-approved fallbacks. These are what they are. He's received the following customer email, challenging some of our terminology. You are the trusted legal advisor to Ben. Please prepare a short email in response to that customer. And when we saw the response come back, we suddenly, it was a real moment of, wow, this thing could make policy and process really accessible. And actually, we can train and coach people in an organization that's growing as much as ours, right at the point of need. So yeah, we can move to the next slide. So where are we now? I talk about a sort of unlock moment in January. What does AI within the TravelPerk legal and privacy team currently look like? So we have deployed internally 3 AI conversational interfaces, which are powered by ChatGPT 4. What are our objectives behind that? So firstly, we wanted to iterate. We historically had a decision tree style bot that was acted like a quasi corporate wiki. So we knew that with the deployment of this technology, that could be at least 5x better if it was powered by something like this. And the maintenance aspect of that would be seriously reduced. We are on a mission, particularly as we scale and the customer base is growing so exponentially, to produce fewer but better tickets. So we actually do what we were trained to do, which is problem solve at the edge case. We've become really excited about demystifying policy and process and therefore driving up business autonomy. If people have information at their fingertips when they need it, that's transformationally better than a quarterly training workshop. So, and we're seeing real gains in that sense. And one thing that stretches on for that is when you think about your consumer of legal services in-house, they experience in their personal life 0 friction. When they order an Uber, that's an on-demand service. They have transparency of output. They have all this curated knowledge around the driver history, the age of the car. And when they rub up against a sort of more archaic transactional legal service process, it's almost sits at odds with that. So we're seeing real gains in like this idea that when you actually need us, we're producing value. And then to talk through some of the other stuff, we do leverage this technology within our current CLM, a little bit more nascent than what Pedram is hoping to release later this year. And as I'm sure you all are, we are trying to drive the policy agenda for leveraging AI across TK. So if we move on to the next slide. So how do we influence prompts generated by our users? Like, to bring this full circle, this is not us now as the prompter, but this is encouraging our users to interact with the bots that we've dropped. So what you see on the screen here is a series of workflow prompts that are deployed to the relevant Slack channel to really sort of try and elicit great interactions, great engagement, and optimize the performance of the material that's powering these bots. What are the real insights that we've derived from the launch of these things? The richness and the speculative nature and the volume of queries is just really insightful. Like, there is now no perceived social barrier to entry to legal. Like, people are not like writing a formal email, they're not approaching us through Zendesk and sort of giving a category ticket and whatnot. They can speculate and co-pilot as they go. And that is really unlocking some interesting behaviors that I'm sure, like, if any of you have deployed this yourselves, that we were prehistorically a bit blind to. The other thing that that does as well is that shapes a content curation strategy. So what you'll find is you'll find an initial wave of engagement. One thing, when we launched the first bot, we launched it to our super users. So that's 85 people in our business. And I mentioned before, we have 1,500. We did that on the Monday. And by the Thursday, the channel was at 540. And that was with no marketing. That was just word of mouth. So now our super user base has grown. People accessing our technology and sort of co-piloting with it has changed. And that changed the dynamic around how we frame our own delivery of services. So that's been really interesting. So yeah, we can move to the next slide, Pedram. So just building on the theme of learnings and sort of some of those attributes I really wanted to make sure people take away from this. We were the first to actually deploy a GPT powered bot at TravelPerk. TravelPerk's an extremely innovative business and a lot of resources powered in us being innovative. But why we were the first team sits and goes to the core of the original message I'm trying to make clear is we sit on a lot of knowledge that helps power our business operation. Like, in-house legal teams work at the intersection of a lot of other teams. Like, if, as in the Promata example, you control the underlying document that customers need to sign, then you are an influential actor in the sort of revenue generating side of your business. So we were able to stand up materials that could materially have impact straight away. And I don't think we in TravelPerk Legal are unique in that sense. I repeat what I said earlier. This is now occupying a lot of our time. I think I've seen questions around like this thing's coming for our jobs and different things like that. Well, I can tell you the early days this is actually redirecting our focus. So in a world in which policy that used to be drafted to meet a requirement and was then put in a drawer, that policy is now 100x more accessible. Like, that policy is completing bidding process forms now. Like, people are co-piloting with that policy to clarify to interested prospects what TravelPerk's corporate social responsibility strategy is. And it's just been so interesting to see. And now we have data to underline the significance of certain policies. So at the end of 2023, I can intelligently say to sales leadership, our modern slavery statement has been requested 78 times. You know, like, that is an influence then in onboarding enterprise customers. And I think the thing that the team, and that's the internal team, is most engaged around is we can coach at the point of need. So really was minded to sort of introduce at the start that in a business where headcount has grown 300% in 18 months, how do you effectively retain knowledge in people? How do you effectively train knowledge into people when you've got onboardings of 64 at a time? It's almost impossible. And then, you know, I talk back to like attention economy, and people are becoming better at indexing knowledge, not necessarily retaining it. There's a skill now to know how to answer a question, but you don't necessarily need to know that answer. You just need to know where to find it. And so we're seeing like the opportunity of being able to coach at the point of need as a huge win in this. And then finally, start small, then iterate. That's exactly what we did. Cool.
All right, thanks, Tom. So let's move on to questions. So we were given a lot of questions ahead of time as people registered, and to be able to cover as many of them as possible, we kind of put them in these buckets. So there's this general questions around GPT reliability, accuracy, hallucinations. Do we trust it? What do we do with it? How do we, how do we kind of avoid the pitfalls, if you will? Tom, would you like to kind of take a first crack at answering this bucket of questions?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've covered machine hallucinations in depth, Badram, but probably only to our particular use cases, which is what I refer to as the closed data set model, you're referring to as the sandbox environment. One thing to bear in mind is we do use the public interfaces. So we ideate in the public interfaces. So you've seen the January example of that moment where we unlocked value or potential value from ChatGPT. We still do that. Like you've seen that last week, I did that legal design use case where I'm interested in how do I get this summary of a heavily legal jargon clause as a visual aid to a reader as they're reading it. So we do ideate there. So our risk tolerance for hallucinations in the public sphere is pretty high. We're not expecting Marvel answers. We just want direction. And then I explained that we found pretty high level performance and maybe even human comparable with our own sort of closed data set models.
And I would add to that the number one thing you need to do is to educate your users about the risks of these hallucinations, about the risks of these errors. The one good thing about GPT is that it justifies every answer with a reference. Hey, go through and look up the reference and see if it actually is the correct reference. And then the other thing I do is if I'm dealing with GPT directly, I ask it the same question 2 or 3 different ways to see if I end up with the same answer. So if you just ask the question once and you accept verbatim whatever answer it gives, but if you ask it again and it still gives the same answer, because GPT doesn't necessarily always come back with the same answer to the same question every time, but if the essence of the answer is the same, you can kind of feel pretty good that it's the right answer. So there is a little bit of onus of making sure that in fact, what the answer that you've been given is accurate, and you shouldn't just take it verbatim. Next category of questions is around data privacy and security concerns. This has been kind of in the news a lot. People put their private information into GPT to ask it questions, and lo and behold, it ended up being exposed to the public. The thing got trained on it or something along those lines, and so there's a lot of worry about this. Of course, there should be, especially if you're putting key critical data in there. So, Tom, how do you guys deal with this?
So this has been a long journey. I mean, I think our privacy team were poring over this in sort of January and February, and we leverage OpenAI the way we currently leverage it, albeit that's changing. I think it's changing next week. We are opting out. We are proactively opting out. Interestingly, they're launching a product next week, which is opt out by default. We are trying to educate the business. Like we have an AI policy, and just to distill that down, that revolves around 3 metrics: be an owner, security, then convenience, and don't rely on AI. We have a security team that's sort of hardwired our sort of corporate email accounts to ensure that everyone has opted out before they start using it. And then we have a policy under the hood of that in the public interface around what our threshold for comfort is around the knowledge we share with it. And then one thing I think it's important to impress on the audience is within the 3 conversational interfaces we've developed, we have let's call that, one of them is the corporate wiki knowledge star bot with a lot of privacy information. So the privacy information is all accessible through our website. We have a privacy center, we have a white paper, we make this stuff available to our prospect customers anyway. The bot just makes it more accessible, predominantly to our sales team who are trying to communicate this to our prospect customers. If you think about a bot that is interested in summary level law by jurisdiction, the nice use case there is this information is publicly accessible. It's not behind a legal firewall, and our comfort and tolerance for risk is quite high in that respect. So that's 2 bots kind of taken care of. And then when we look at the virtual coach we have that people co-pilot with, that is a decision that we've consciously taken to say, okay, we've opted out. The way we feel we've designed this system means we're going to be okay. But these are internal policies. So if in a bizarre circumstance, these left the building, then they would be really bad policies if we couldn't defend their existence. So that's another aspect that we've consciously sort of dug into and delved into.
And one thing I would add to that answer is, OpenAI, the company that invented GPT, is a startup and highly innovative startup, as you can imagine. And much like Tesla is a highly innovative company that is on the leading edge of technology, but isn't necessarily all that great at building high quality, safe, secure cars. Mercedes-Benz is a lot better at building solid cars than Tesla is, but their technology isn't as good as Tesla. So OpenAI and the ChatGPT as a service is a service that is being built by a company that's highly innovative, right? Clearly groundbreaking, but isn't necessarily doesn't have a lot of experience building these highly scalable, secure platforms, whereas Microsoft, who is their biggest investor, is. So there is, for example, a Microsoft Azure OpenAI service that's hosted by Microsoft that addresses a lot of these data privacy and security concerns, and also performance and reliability concerns in ways that maybe OpenAI isn't quite capable of, because again, just Microsoft has been doing this for a lot longer at a lot larger scale. So if you're dealing with information that's highly sensitive, like contract information, you may want to opt for going toward a service like in a Microsoft Azure OpenAI service instead of kind of the general OpenAI service that's offered by OpenAI.
I've just actually dropped into the chat something that the Deputy General Counsel of Microsoft released, I think just 2 days ago, on the sort of assurance work they're doing with regards to this technology. And it's a really interesting read for us, and no doubt the legal professionals on this call.
Yeah, please look up the link in the chat. That should tell you a lot of answers. Next category: how does legal ops get started with generative AI? There's this general question of what do we do? How do we get started? What do we even do with this? This unknown thing that is, there's a mystery has taken over the world. Should we get started with it today, or should we wait? Or what's the right answer? Tom?
Yeah, so hopefully I've given you a flavor of how we started. We started ideating in ChatGPT 3. We saw potential solutions and pathways to solving problems that we were experiencing, and a lot of that is around making knowledge far more accessible. And so we did start small. We iterated upon a legacy bot that was keyword search based. So somebody would go into the Slack channel, type NDA, and that's all they would type. There would be no need for context because the thing would fall over with too much context. And we transform that experience. And once we did that, you quickly got a feel for other problems we were experiencing and other opportunities we could leverage. And I go back to the point that I want everyone to leave with is like, if this is programming in natural language and we've been trained as legal professionals to deal in natural language in a very articulate way, like it is a great opportunity for us.
And I would say, sign up for ChatGPT, sign up, particularly pay the $20 a month and get GPT-4, because the chasm of difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4, and start playing with it. Like ideation, like Tom was mentioning. But I would take, from a legal ops perspective, the most painful aspect of your job, which is typically queries coming in of about this and that and this contract and this policy and so on and so forth, which is really kind of a lot of knowledge questions as to what's our history with this account, what are our policies and so on, depending on whatever is the most painful part of your exercise, of your experience. And if you have policy documents around those, there's relatively easy ways to create a chatbot, load those policy documents into the chatbot, and let it just let people ask questions, and it can answer those questions, particularly with GPT-4, highly effectively. GPT-3 can do a decent job as well, but GPT-4, especially when it comes to legalese, can do a much better job. So my suggestion is start there and get a toe in the water, and then get a foot in the water, right? Instead of kind of being paralyzed by the magnitude of this thing. As soon as you get started and get in the water, you realize, wait a minute, I actually get this. I can actually use it to, can actually get value out of it. At Permata, one of the painful points for us is, as a technology company, we get a lot of RFPs, a lot of information security questionnaires that we have to fill out, where the same question is asked 200 different ways, and we have to answer it over and over and over again. And it's very time consuming, very painful. And so we set up a chatbot with all of our historical questionnaires that we've answered loaded into it, all of our policy documents loaded into it. And when we get a new questionnaire, we just ask the bot the question, and it just, based on what it knows, it does its best to answer. So that kind of expedites things quite a bit. It's a really good way to get a foot in the water, to be able to get hands-on with GPT. And then once you're in there, the sky is the limit. If you're an innovative company, you can find all kinds of ways to use it. What I can, and I guess maybe let's move on to the next question, because this sets up the next question. Why start now? Why not wait until this thing is mature? Why not, what does the future hold? What's going to happen in the next 12 months? Thoughts on that, Tom?
Why start now? I'll circle back to a question I saw earlier as well around the concept of waiting, and like you will wait in isolation. So I think one thing we discussed last night, Pedram, was like in-house legal teams might have informed, but certainly weren't the decision maker when we decided to move our data from private data servers onto cloud-based services. And the chances are, like, you're going to inform an AI strategy, but you're not going to make the decision. So if you want to continue to be credible and inform debates around this, you really need to get in and start playing with it. I go off pat, but I had a conversation with an engineer at our place on Tuesday, and he talked about 70% of the code he committed in his last sprint cycle was co-piloted. So like, the genie's out of the bottle. This thing is being used, and we obviously are risk managers. So we're particularly sensitive around and perhaps overstate the significance of our data and like its sensitivity. But when you've actually got coders creating solutions for customers using co-piloted code, you're into a different realm, and you really need to maintain your credibility. I do think you need to get involved in how these things work.
There's a saying in AI GPT world, which is that GPT is not going to take over your job. people who use GPT are going to take over your job, or AI is not going to take over your job. People use AI are going to take over your job. So the more you sit on your hands and wait, the further you fall behind. And if you give yourself the courage to jump in, you'll realize the water is actually pretty warm and nice, and you can actually swim in it. That's the beauty of large language models. It's the beauty of being able to program without code, program in natural language, which is essentially what GPT is. So we encourage you to jump in. Laurel, do we have time for additional questions, or the time to wrap up?
We got, you've been very thorough. We did get a bunch, but I've tried to bucket them. I think if we can briefly answer one kind of group. People are wondering how, and I'm thinking that this is if they are not currently using, a platform like a contract repository that leverages GPT, how they could leverage, or if they can leverage ChatGPT to find contracts in their inbox, or if they need to upload them into like an Azure environment or something like that, like if it's possible, or if you need to use a platform.
You do have to load your documents, your contracts into GPT in a safe environment for it to be able to find them for you and answer questions for you. So if you're not using a product, a commercial product that has GPT built into it, Azure has certain templates for you to be able to create a chatbot very quickly by loading documents into it. And it generates the whole UI and everything, and you can get up and running relatively quickly. I would encourage you to go look into and research that and look into that, which is, that's exactly what we use, for example, for our internal bot.
Nothing said from me. You're the sort of doyen, Pedram, of CLMs.
Anything else, Laura?
I think that is all we have time for, unfortunately, today, but I have a bunch of ones that I have captured, so we can be prepared to follow up with anybody that would like.
Okay, Lauren, we'll hand off to you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Tom and Pedram, for this. This has been a wonderful, wonderful event here. So we really appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge with us. And I know we didn't get to many of the questions, so I do apologize for that, but we will be following up. So just one more huge thank you to Pramada for sponsoring this webinar, and we really appreciate you all as the audience for coming and engaging. We will be sending out the recording tomorrow along with the handout, so you will get that in about 24 hours so that you can go back and watch and listen and all of those things. And just one more reminder to please take a moment and take the survey that will be coming up. That really just helps us plan, and we will also be sharing with the presenters as well. So thank you so much for everything, and we hope to see you on our next webinar.
Thank you.